Here's the quiet truth that every fan knows deep down but really doesn't want to be true. The Mandalorian will probably never be as hyped as Season 2 again, and that's because that peak was not an accident. It was a convergence of story timing, audience feeling, and franchise momentum that is almost impossible to replicate again today. On this channel, I want to keep it simple and keep it grounded, so let's walk through 4 clear reasons that explain why Season 2 felt like lightning in a bottle that brought millions of people to tears across the world, and why recapturing that exact charge is so unlikely. First, the Luke Skywalker moment could only have happened once. All the right conditions were aligned. After a small-scale Season 1 that made the galaxy feel close and intimate again, fans were ready to believe that Star Wars could still move them. At the same time, Luke Skywalker sat in a strange cultural place. For many, his arc in the sequel era felt unresolved, and for some, even ruined, which created a major hunger for a version of Luke that felt mythic and merciful once again. Season 2 answered that hunger with a finale that kept its secret locked until release, with production locking down Mark Hamill's involvement behind codenames, tiny circles of trust, and careful set control, which even had them pretending to the crew members that Plo Koon was returning. The moment landed like a myth made real. An X-Wing in a window, a green blade in a dark hall, a father who could not win the fight, and a Jedi who could. It was a pure cinematic experience that needed no explanation. The surprise was earned by 2 seasons of setup and by 40 years of memory. That collision of secrecy, nostalgia, and timing is not repeatable in the same way. There was only that point that had Luke both hated by people who watched him in the sequels, but also loved by people who watched him as a child, and those 2 things came together for him to feel redeemed in that moment that he returned to save the child. You can't restore faith twice. You can deepen it and complicate it, but you can't recreate the first time a symbol of childhood walks back into the room and delivers a rescue that feels both inevitable and impossible. And for some viewers, the Luke scene later in the Book of Boba Fett added new friction, especially the moment where he asked Grogu to choose between the Jedi path and his bond with Din Djarin. You can read that scene as a sincere challenge or as needless dogma, one that many prequel fans thought would be done away with by Luke because of how it caused the prequel era Jedi to completely destroy themselves. But either way, it complicated the afterglow of the rescue for a portion of the audience, and it just meant that hype could probably never be reached again, especially under those circumstances. Season 2's finale worked because it completed a circle. Doing a second lap on the same circle doesn't carry the same emotional charge. Second is the rising hype of seeing characters from other shows and media every week. Season 2 built a staircase of cameos that climbed a step higher almost every week, which created a steady drumbeat of anticipation. The premiere gave us Cobb Vanth and a Crate Dragon hunt that felt like a 90-minute IMAX movie, which was exciting for everybody who watched it on Disney+. 2 weeks later came Bo-Katan's live-action debut, a major moment for fans of the Clone Wars and Rebels, and a clean line between Din's rigid creed and the wider Mandalorian story. The next week revealed an Imperial lab and Dr. Pershing's desperate holo, complete with the loaded phrase M-Count, which brought back memories from prequel fans about midichlorians. Then the very next chapter brought Ahsoka Tano into live action for the first time ever, revealed Grogu's name, and dropped a certain blue-eyed Grand Admiral Thrawn, which sent Reddit threads into overdrive. Speculation was rampant. 2 weeks after that, Boba Fett arrived in full and changed the balance of power on Tython. Oh, and did I mention Tython is actually the original home of the Jedi Order, so that was another massive connection. 1 episode later, they slowed down to breathe with Bill Burr's absolutely incredible performance as Mayfield to talk about morality and masks, and referencing the famous Palpatine contingency plan Operation Cinder from the books and video games. Then the season cashed in everything all at once in the finale. The weekly structure mattered because it turned the show into an event you could not miss. Think about the cadence: a rewarding opener, a second chapter that holds position, a third that widens the canvas, a fourth that reveals a secret lab, the 5th that drops a beloved Jedi, a 6th that then brings back the most famous bounty hunter in the galaxy, a 7th that pauses for character, and then an 8th that detonates. If you think about what Disney Plus is doing now, they're releasing 3 episodes per week, especially with Andor, and it just removes so much speculation. If the show is only ongoing for about a month, you just simply don't have the time to build speculation, to build theories, to build everything that goes with making hype and producing fan content around Star Wars. That escalation of week to week was built to crescendo. But the other thing to note is that the second time they try to do something like this, the rhythm no longer surprises. And that's why cameos are getting weaker and weaker every time Star Wars does them, and people are getting sick of them, because some fans think it feels like a replacement for good storytelling when they're just throwing in characters you already know to point and look, instead of actually having substance and character development and good plots. The third reason is the Clone Wars Season 7 aftermath. The second season of Mando landed just as the Clone Wars Season 7 finished its victory lap with the Siege of Mandalore. That timing amplified everything. The final arc hit like a hammer, stitched directly into the fall of the Republic, and gave animation that scale and sorrow of myth. Demand for the finale spiked to the top of the United States market during the week of May the 4th, with the industry tracking calling it the most in-demand science fiction series in the country across that period. The critical response treated the run as a crowning achievement and The Siege of Mandalore as the series at its peak. That kind of attention changes the air in the room. It raises expectations and raises curiosity. That synergy really mattered because it sent a signal. The Clone Wars had just reminded the world that Star Wars animation could carry tragedy with operatic weight. Then it passed the baton to a live-action series that was already connecting characters and ideas across eras. The afterglow of the Clone Wars led straight into that of anticipation for The Mandalorian Season 2. Season 2 didn't need to convince new viewers that Star Wars could go big and go deep. The table had already been set the moment Ahsoka and Maul crossed blades and Order 66 fell like a curtain. You can't recreate the feeling of stepping into a room that just finished a standing ovation. The fandom was hyped, speculation was rampant, how would this connect to Mando, how would this connect to other things, and there was just so much hype and so much optimism in the Star Wars community that set the stage and set the table for Mando Season 2 to come out just a few months later. Now, the fourth reason is the Snoke and Palpatine connection. Season 2 began to whisper answers about cloning and the post-Endor plan like Operation Cinder, which created a strange new hope among the fandom, even for those who didn't really like what the sequel trilogy did. In late 2020, there was still a real sense among parts of the fandom that the legacy of Snoke could be repaired if the story behind him gained texture and explanation for all the different quirks. The lab on Navarro, the bodies in the tanks, and Pershing's recording referenced infusions from a subject with a high M count. Viewers connected these fragments to the sequel era and imagined a path where a grounded cloning plot could turn a puzzling cartoon villain into the endpoint of a coherent chain of choices and experiments. Even skeptics admitted that the puzzle pieces at least fit on the same table. For a while, the show gave audiences permission to believe that a hidden spine existed and that this crew would follow it to the end. That whisper created speculative energy. People debated whether Din and Grogu would be part of the major cloning plan, Exegol's laboratories, so many things connected to Snoke, cloning, Operation Cinder. There was so much potential. They traded screenshots of deformed figures and passed Pershing's language about failed trials and rejected blood over a fortnight, going back and forth, Twitter posts speculating about everything. It was a thread for people to pull on. It was a reason for people to keep watching. So fans kept watching and the talk stayed hot and everyone was talking about Star Wars. When you stack these four reasons together, you can see why the Season 2 peak will be so hard to match, if it's even possible, which I don't think it is, as this video has shown. The Luke moment was a once-in-a-lifetime alignment of secrecy, timing, and cultural appetite for Luke to be redeemed. It brought the whole fandom together, people that hated TLJ, people that loved TLJ. Everyone was willing to give Star Wars another chance when they did this. But then that was all shredded and taken down when Cara Dune, aka Gina Carano, got fired just a few weeks later. This absolutely took all the momentum out of the Mando sales, and it really divided the fandom again, and it really has not been the same since then. Some people permanently checked out, some people unsubscribed from Disney+, and really it hasn't been the same since then. We also have to remember another pressure that lurks behind the scenes. The franchise has widened since 2020. Stories like Andor and Ahsoka explore different tonal paths for Star Wars. While The Bad Batch extends the clone era and new titles claim their own territory in different areas, the energy that once collected around a single show now disperses across many. That is healthy for the galaxy, which is too large to live on one tone, but it lowers the probability of any one single season owning the microphone for weeks at a time. Although, if something is really that good and as good as Mando Season 2 was at building hype, then it can do it. So what would it take to challenge that peak? In theory, a new arc could produce comparable energy if it meets several tests. It would need a mystery with a galaxy-wide implication that the series commits to resolving on screen, not in a spin-off. It would need a run of episodes that stacks stakes in clear steps up each week, so that each Friday or Wednesday whenever it releases builds and feels bigger than the last. It would need to be a tonally different but an equally potent form of surprise. We need something more refined. Now that we've seen what Andor can do, people are not going to tolerate the rough edges of The Mandalorian, we'll say, or the rough edges of Dave Filoni's writing. It needs to have on-par writing with Andor, but also bring in those Star Wars elements which make the franchise so fun, so relatable, and so prone to speculation. Things like the Force, things like Jedi, things like lightsabers. So what do you think? Can the Mando ever reach the hype level of Season 2 ever again, or are we done forever? Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this little mini documentary and want to see more, check out the one on screen now and subscribe for plenty more, and I'll see you in the next one. If you made it this far, drop a thank you Mr. Vader in the comments down below.